What are some of the pros and cons when comparing new bikes versus used bikes when you are shopping for a Harley-Davidson? There are some obvious pros to new bikes. One is that a lot of people just want a new bike. They want the most modern features. And included in that, some people just want the most recent model year. Comparing a used unit to a new unit when you're motorcycle shopping can be kind of a stressful situation because there's a lot of variability in this topic. Most of us will likely not be comparing the exact same two units. So it's not like all of us are looking at, this year, this mileage, this price of a bike compared to a brand new bike. I think a lot of this comes down to your personal philosophy and what's important to you. But let's dig into the details a little bit. So some of the pros, or quote unquote pros, you may agree, you may disagree. Some may be on a spectrum and you're like, yeah, that's kind of a pro, I guess, but it's not really that important to me. But after selling quite a few Harley Davidsons, you kind of start to see a pattern of things that strike a chord with people and them make decisions based off of some of these considerations. Sometimes people just want the newest, the latest and greatest. They want it to be a current model year. They don't want to be buying something that's a little bit older. Some people want to start with a bike that is always theirs. Like from the get-go, from day one, they're the first person to own that bike, first person to put mods and miles on it. Sometimes that can tie into the thought where I've heard people say, well, I don't want to inherit someone else's problems. I can totally understand that sentiment, but that's not always true because you can get a used bike and it can be absolutely wonderful and be a totally reliable machine. You can also inversely buy a brand new unit, and this is why we have lemon laws. You can go out and buy a brand new car and it has problem after problem after problem. So just because you buy new does not mean you will guaranteed be immune to any kind of warranty issues or mechanical failures of some kind. But that being said, when you buy a new bike, it should have very low mileage, and used bikes can often come with very low mileage as well, but typically most of the time the new bike is going to have lower miles than any used bike. And when it's newer, hopefully you're further away from any type of unexpected or out of the ordinary maintenance or repairs like you could be on a bike that had 20,000 miles versus 3 miles when you buy it brand new. Another way people are motivated to buy new bikes is that typically lenders are going to offer a better interest rate and loan you more money on a new bike than they would a used bike. So this can get complex, but let's take a general person who has good credit. They're looking at a bike, and the benefit to this used bike is that it has some really cool mods on it that they really like. And they're looking at this brand new bike and it's pretty much stock. So let's say that the price between these two bikes is exactly the same. Let's say we're working with a $25,000 bike. This is a brand new bike at $25,000, and this is a used bike priced at $25,000, and you're agreeable to that price because it has, great pipe, bar setup, seat, everything that you like about it, whatever you're picturing in your head right now, and between these two bikes that you're comparing. On that used bike, they're going to loan less money than they will on the new bike. And that could potentially put you in a position where you have to put more money down, and you compound that with a little bit higher interest rate. Depending on the lender, if you're using the manufacturer lender, like if you're using Harley-Davidson Financial, they're going to give you a little bit better rate, and they're going to loan you more money on the new bike, which can make that barrier to entry a little bit easier. Now, the cons of the new bike is that it's bone stock. A lot of people will buy a bike and they have a parts list, and they get those parts started and they get an appointment on the books with their new bike, and they're not picking the bike up until it has these modifications. Like, I'm not riding it stock. And there's a lot of people like that. And then you have the price. So you have all these modifications on that used bike, if we're using the same analogy, and none of those modifications on the new bike. So you're going to end up spending more money because you want to do those mods, and all those mods are going to cost money. They're kind of built into the price on the used one, but they're not built into the price on the new one. So there, not only do you have the inflated price of the new one, but you're also going to have that depreciation factor on it. So depending on the person in this scenario, some of you are thinking like, hands down, no brainer, I'm getting the used bike. And the other half of people are saying, no, I want the new bike. I don't care if it costs more money because I'm going to do it exactly the way that I want to do it. And this kind of comes into the pros of getting a used bike is price. They're always going to be cheaper than their exact same brand new counterpart. And the other pro is that you can likely get a much better deal on aftermarket modifications if they're already done to that unit. So this can be a little bit of a double-edged sword, is that who knows if the person that traded this bike in or sold this bike did exactly what you wanted to do. So sometimes you can end up getting this bike and it's like, yeah, it's got this pipe. Yeah, it's got these bars. It's got the stage 2 kit. It's got extra audio. It's got the nice seat on it. And then you start to ride it and you're like, you know what? I'm going to end up changing the seat anyway. The bars are just not quite right. So I'm going to change the bars anyway. And then you start to kind of undo all of that value you kind of got out of that bike. And there can be a lot of cons to used bikes as well, depending on the unit, depending on the age of the unit, depending on the mileage. So that's one thing. You're always going to have mileage on a used bike, or almost always. There are the rare occasions where you can find super low mile bikes. But even if a bike is 3-4 years old and it has super low mileage, sometimes you have the feeling that, maybe I'm going to kind of run into problems that they just hadn't had time to run into. So they only rode the bike 65 miles and, maybe that problem was going to arise at 500 miles and I haven't even gotten there. And you can feel like you get to that problem zone much faster. Now, not everyone abuses their bike, but also not everyone really takes good care of their bike. So there's kind of a little bit of risk involved. And this is the same thing when you're looking at used cars was there any previous abuse that I'm not aware of? Because you can shine it up, but you don't really know how that engine was treated previous to it being traded in or sold to you. One other con with buying a used bike is that you can kind of feel like you get aged out faster. So if you buy a bike that's 3 years old, and let's say you sign a 5-year term length on financing. So the bike is 3 years old. By the time you pay it off, it's going to be 8 years old. And you're going to feel like the bike is much older, much faster, just because you started from a little bit behind the starting line. Now, for some people, this may be a good thing. When we had the changeover with the fairings changing in 24, a lot of people were instantly looking for the older stuff and saying like, I don't like this change. Let me go snatch up the other stuff. And the used market kind of took a little boom every time that major change happens because some people just want to stick with what they know. Now, another con of used bikes is that you just can't be as picky. So when it comes to new bikes, and if we're in the middle of the model year and bikes are released, you can order bikes from the factory. You can be as picky as you want because this is what they have. This is the model that I'm looking at. This is the color combo that they're offering, and I can find that bike. And if you're my customer and you're like, hey, Mickey, this is a 2025 model and this is what I want. If I don't have it, I can get it for you because they're currently in production. When it comes to a used bike, once in a while I get these phone calls and it's like, hey, this is the bike I'm looking for. And I'm like, oh, cool. That's a great bike. That bike is discontinued. They don't make it anymore. Well, can you get me one? Like from where? So I can't just conjure up units and I can't go look up people who've bought this bike previously and say, hey, it's time for you to sell your bike at exactly the price that this guy wants to buy it at. So if you are a little bit picky or you know exactly what you want and you're just like, hey, I have a bike like that. I want a 2020 FXLR. I want a standard lowrider in the white. And I don't think they made a whole lot of those units. I don't think I've ever even seen one in person. I've seen pictures of it and I'm like, that's the bike. That if that bike ever comes around, I'm going to figure out a way to have that as my second bike because I absolutely love it. And I want that bike because my FXR is not reliable. And I want a bike that can do reliably what I wish my FXR could do, but can't. So all of this comes with a fair amount of risk. Either way, you're either risking that you're going to buy a more expensive bike and you're going to have to put more money into it depending on the level of modifications that you want to do, or you're risking buying a bike that may be coming up on some sort of unexpected maintenance or repairs that you're not able to foresee at the moment. I think this can sometimes be a difficult situation depending on the models that are available. So sometimes with used bikes, you just kind of have to be patient and ready. And I tell people that a lot where they're looking for a specific unit or they're waiting for something to come up that's a certain color in a certain price range, is you just kind of have to be patient. And when it comes up, you got to be ready. So I'm sure there are some anecdotal stories about like, oh, I bought a used bike and now I have 750,000 miles on it in the last 3 years and I've never had an issue. I haven't even had to change the oil. It's perfection. You should only buy used bikes. You either have another anecdotal story that'll say, I only buy new bikes because one time I bought a used bike. I was riding it home from the guy's house and it blew up and it caught on fire. I went back to his house and he had up and moved and disappeared. I could never find him. He must have used a fake name. So if you've watched any of my channels, you know I'm always gonna bring it up. Everything is on a spectrum. And in this scenario, everything is a little bit of a risk. It is still a risk to buy a new bike, and it is still a risk to buy a used bike. And there's really no one concrete answer. It really comes down to what are the two bikes that you're comparing and what are those features. Sometimes if you're buying used enough, 4, 5, 6 years old, it may not have features that the new model might have. So if you have a bagger from 2019, you're comparing a Road King to a new Road King. And, in 2019, not all the baggers had ABS and traction control wasn't a feature. And now in 2025, they are. They have ABS and they have traction control as standard on the Street Glide, the Road Glide. ABS is standard on the Road King Special. I think RDRS is still an optional feature on the Road King Special, but still an option where you can go back to that new thing where you can be a little bit more picky and say, okay, well, I want this color and I want these features on it. Whereas with a used bike, you're kind of just subject to what's available on the market at the moment when you're ready to buy. And then also if you're comparing maybe a 2019 Street Glide Special to a brand new Street Glide, the motor size is going to be different. There's a lot of different features that come on the bike. Not all the parts are completely compatible. Some of the parts are compatible. So let's say you have, a 2014 Rushmore, first year of the Rushmore Street Glide, and you're like, well, all of this stuff is going to fit. Like I can keep my bars, I can keep my sissy bar, my docking hardware, my tour pack, and this is all going to fit on my 19, whereas only some of that stuff is going to fit on the 25. So a lot of these anecdotes and hypotheticals have a lot of variability in them, and really what it comes down to is picking a bike is kind of like picking a tattoo. The only reason you need is that you like it. And some people will value an older feature so much that they will actually put more value on a used bike because a touring bike from 2019 had a hydraulic clutch. And after, I think 21 and after, they were all back to cable clutches. And the hydraulic clutch is super important. And so he's only looking for something in that era, that has the blacked out trim. So 18, 19, and 20, and a certain model and a certain color. He's going to have to be a lot more patient because you can't really just conjure up a unit in an exact color with these exact features on them. So for instance, if you like the hydraulic clutch and you like traction control, then the year that you're looking for is 2020. 2020 was the first year that they came out with traction control option on baggers, and it was also the last year of having the hydraulic clutch on the touring bikes. So one thing I recommend to people, which always makes people laugh, is I say you should flip a coin. And not so much that the coin toss tells you which bike that you should buy, but the coin toss is going to tell you something about yourself. And if you flip a coin and you slap it on your hand and you lift your hand up, you're going to know whether you want best 2 out of 3 or if you're like, yeah. And that'll kind of tell you where you stand. And if you still can't decide, then shoot me an email. I just had a guy email me. Dang it, I can't remember his name. And I emailed him back to see if he wanted to do it on video to compare a Dyna Street Bob to a more modern M8 Street Bob. I think that's a fantastic conversation to have because I have a lot to say about those two bikes and I like them both. So I'm excited to have this conversation with him. So if you have any questions, man, feel free to email me. I love talking about motorcycles. It's 10:47 at night. I worked today and I'm in my garage talking about motorcycles. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you on the next one.